Carrie's journey from the mind of Stephen King to his readers, and ultimately into the cultural zeitgeist, is not your typical journey for a book, as we shall see in this episode, our first part of a multi-part CARRIE Megasode. Megasode! Few books have reached such high highs from such low lows as Stephen King's debut novel, CARRIE. Just the fact that I'm here making a video about it and you're here watching it, having at least heard of CARRIE, I hope, says a lot about the novel's enduring legacy. Quite a feat for a story whose fate was almost sealed as a mere few crumpled pieces of paper covered in cigarette ash. Because to Stephen King, CARRIE was a false start. It was a few dead-end pages doomed to be relegated to the waste bin without a second thought. You see, this now infamous story of an outcast high school girl with telekinetic powers was meant to be a short story, but Stephen, as he is wont to do, was writing too much. A problem that, until just yesterday, when I raided his garbage and stole his magical typewriter, was completely foreign to me. Come on! Holy Moses! Behold! But Stephen also wasn't writing enough. See, CARRIE was neither fish nor fowl. It became too long to be a short story and too short to be a novel. This was before the days where King's pedigree could get novellas of this length published. So what did he do? Well, he did what he did to that wonderful typewriter. He threw CARRIE away!
It's too hard, I was lazy, and also it was going to be too long. I didn't understand how I could possibly market something like that, and frankly, I needed the money.
There's a saying that goes, behind every great writer is an even greater magical typewriter. But there is another saying, behind every great man is a great woman, a saying which I would assume Stephen King wrote a version of and then threw in the trash, only to be rescued by a great woman.
I threw it away and my wife fished it out and said it was really good and she wanted to read. She said she wanted to read the rest of it. The story grew a little bit and it sold as a novel. It's a skinny little thing, but it it made me what I am today.
If there's a Mount Rushmore of towering figures whose noble actions gave us the Stephen King we know and love today, his wife Tabitha looms large, chiseled in granite so durable and mighty that not even the winds of time can erode it. Tabitha is a woman so essential to the formation and growth of Stephen King as both a writer and a man that she'll be popping up again and again and again in our series. So even though, yeah, Stephen takes the front seat here at the Stephen Kingdom, never mistake Tabitha as merely the wife of Stephen King, solely existing to jumpstart the career of a literary behemoth in the mid-70s. In fact, look for my Frasier-like spin-off series, The Tabitha Kingdom. Coming to YouTube Live Plus Extra Fall of 2017! As a woman who loves and supports her husband, they've been married for 50 years, she believed in him when no one else did, not even he himself. And there is a very real argument to be made that without Tabitha, Stephen King could well have ended up as a modest schoolteacher in Maine, and pop culture icons like Annie Wilkes and Cujo and Pennywise and Roland Deschain would have remained in the dustbin of an alternate reality, along with those precious abandoned pages of CARRIE. So, of course, she's humble about the absolutely essential role she played in kicking off all this madness.
The first page caught my eye. I swallowed the first sentence and kept on going. Credit a compulsive eye if you want, but also a story with an immediate hook. It wasn't anything more than a fish going for a bright flash.
Tabitha's chance happening upon the early pages of CARRIE would be only one accidental episode among the many other close calls and near misses and right place, right time occurrences that would litter the history of CARRIE and pave its path to bestsellerdom.
It has now
been over 2 months since writer-director David McCracken was last seen, and his mysterious disappearance seems related in some way to the launch of his brand new YouTube series, The Stephen Kingdom, where in each episode he would do a deep dive into one of Stephen King's works. Sounds like a project that would have been not only informative, but also quite entertaining. Something for the casual YouTube viewer as well as Stephen King fans. Miraculously, the Patreon is still active. I spoke with David McCracken's mother at his childhood home.
He was an avid reader. He got all A's in school, a very good student. He was in theater and debate, and he was even editor of the school newspaper. I don't even know if they have that anymore.
Was he bullied at all?
He was just in theater and debate.
Right.
I wonder if that's why he liked this book so much. Was she bullied?
I don't know, I've never read it.
Thank you, Viv. We'll bring you more on the story as it develops. Coming up, can Florida residents now marry manatees? A recent court ruling may surprise you.
The University of Maine. Before Carrie, before Stephen King was Stephen King. And Tabitha King was not yet Mrs. King, but Miss Tabitha Spruce. This is where love, like these flowers, blossom. Stephen recalls. You damn bee!
I met her while we were working together at the Raymond Fogler Library at the University of Maine, but really got to know her in a series of poetry seminars and workshops. She read a story of mine called I Am the Doorway in the early fall of 1970 and said it was one of the best science fiction stories she'd ever read.
Excuse me. Are you Stephen King?
Who's asking?
Your story, I Am the Doorway, is one of the best science fiction stories I've ever read.
I was flattered out of my socks.
Stephen and Tabitha graduated, and as with many newly minted graduates, they found themselves struggling to make ends meet. At first, Stephen couldn't even get a teaching gig, and he slaved away at an industrial laundromat for $60 a week. The profound affection King had for the job is no more clearly apparent than in the short story he based on his time here, the lovingly titled The Mangler. Almost any struggling writer, or any creative person for that matter, knows they have to squeeze the pursuit of their passion in between the jobs that pay the bills. And King was making headway. His first big sale after graduation was for $200 to Cavalier for his short story, Graveyard Shift. His first professional short story sale had actually been in 1967 to Startling Mystery Stories, a story called The Glass Floor. And even though he'd been selling stories since then, Graveyard Shift was the first indication that, hey, maybe you could actually make a living at this writing thing. The problem, though, is the disheartening imbalance of the time it takes to write and rewrite a story and then submit it to a bunch of publications and then maybe, just maybe, get it published. And then, at the end of the day, you get a modest check that absolutely does not cover all the time you devoted to that story. In other words, not enough time to write the sheer volume of stories it would take to make a living. And this sobering reality of every ounce of spare time spent writing versus paltry payment for said writing was really rearing its ugly head when Stephen and Tabitha were in the early days of starting a family. Allow me to paint a picture. Maine, early 1973. It's Maine, so imagine the coldest you've ever been. It's colder than that. Hey, it's Maine. Stephen and Tabitha have both graduated and are now living in a double-wide trailer in Herman, which Stephen would later call the asshole of the world. And then he would apologize for that, dubbing it, really no more than the armpit of the world. Ooh. They've been married for about 2 years now and already have 2 young children, thanks to all that, flattering each other's clothes off. Naomi and Joe. See, Joe Hill would actually go on to become a successful writer in his own right. Stephen still works at that miserable laundromat. But that's that's only in the summertime now. The rest of the year, Stephen is teaching public high school English at the Hampton Academy in Maine. Good news? Starting salary of $6,400 a year is a huge jump from his minimum wage hourly pay at the laundry gig. Bad news? Well, teaching day job plus the outside work it entails, really starting to eat into his writing time. Steve and Tabby's daily routine goes a little something like this. Steve teaches high school English during the day, while Tabby stays at home with the kids. And then Steve comes home as Tabby leaves in her hot pink uniform to work the night shift at Dunkin' Donuts. Dunkin', where, quote, the management heroically overlooked my excessive education. At home, with 2.5-year-old Naomi and less than 1-year-old Joe, Steve preps for the next day's classes, grades homework, and then he crams himself in a tiny room just big enough for himself, a small chair, a children's desk balanced on his thighs, and a trash can. The infamous trash can where Tabby will soon find Carrie. By the way, that room, it's actually the trailer's laundry room, but they don't have a washer and dryer. There's many a night where Tabby comes home to Steve hunched over the typewriter, clacking away at whatever story he's cooking up next. Says Tabby, not again!
He always did an hour or two, no matter how exhausted he was. He used my typewriter, a little Olivetti I bought when I was in high school. I've always suspected he married me for it.
But by this point, King's short story sales are no longer a nice financial cushion that allow him to pursue his dream as a full-time writer.
My short story sales to the men's magazines had become crucial to our financial survival. It got to the point where when one of the kids got an ear infection and we needed to buy antibiotics, Tabby would say, half joking and half not, "Hurry up, Steve, think of a monster."
So think of a monster he often does, and the checks always seem to come just in time to buy antibiotics for the baby's ear infection or to keep the telephone in the apartment for another record-breaking month. But even these aren't enough, and soon the Kings disconnect the telephone to save just a little more money. Oh, by the way, losing the phone happens the same month Stephen submits the manuscript of Carrie. Tabby recounts just how bad things are getting at the King household, is it trailer hold?
To save the quarters going into the dryers at the laundromat. I had Steve bring the laundry home wet and then hung it all over the living room. We had horrendous battles over the $5 he spent each week for a carton of cigarettes and his overdue fines at the library. I could get 5 bags of groceries out of a food budget of $20.
Stephen sums up their situation thusly.
Budget was not exactly the word for whatever it was we were on. It was more like a modified version of the Bataan Death March.
In a pressure cooker like this, it's a wonder Stephen was able to find the time, or hell, the sheer mental energy to write a single damn sentence. But if Stephen is nothing else, he's a goddamn workhorse.
People think the muse is some cute little pudgy devil who floats around the head of the creative person sprinkling fairy dust. Well, mine's a guy with a flat top and coveralls who looks like Jack Webb and says, "All right, you son of a bitch, time to get to work."
But even with the guidance of his flat-topped muse, the relentless onslaught of this overwhelming lifestyle, can you even call this a lifestyle? It began to take its toll.
By most afternoons, I felt as if I'd spent the week with jumper cables clamped to my brain.
Yeesh! Just recounting the life of the King family in the early 70s is giving me a borderline anxiety attack, and yet, it is in this trailer, with Stephen King and his family drowning in abject poverty, that Carrie is born. Richard Branson once said, "It takes years to become an overnight success." Or to put it another way, a lot of people think I was an overnight success, but I was an opening act for 3 or 4 years. Then I signed my contract with EMI, and it kind of blew up overnight. Vanilla ice. See, Misters Ice and Branson may as well be describing Stephen King's success with Carrie. Well, except for the signing with EMI part. You see, it's not as if Tabitha found Carrie in the trash, King gave the novel another shot, yanked the last page out of the typewriter, mailed in the manuscript, and then wham, became a bona fide bestseller. Because see, Carrie was not King's first novel, it was his 6th. So what on the surface looks like a rags to riches overnight success story is actually years of punishing failures. Which brings us to the 3rd head on our Stephen King Mount Rushmore, Bill Thompson. Bill Thompson would end up editing most of King's earliest books, many of which are now considered his most iconic. Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, Night Shift, The Stand. But this match made in publishing heaven was, like a lot of Carrie's success, mainly the result of a series of happy accidents. Before King wrote any of these iconic books, he wrote Getting It On, his very first novel. He thought he'd have the best chance at getting it published at Doubleday, which in those days was, as King put it, an enormous fiction mill. And hey, Doubleday published The Parallax View by Lauren Singer, which King liked. So why not send Getting It On to the editor of that novel? Enter happy accident number, I don't know, I've lost count. The editor of The Parallax View just happened to have left Doubleday, and when he did so, he divvied up his books among his fellow editors. Young go-getter Bill Thompson right there was entrusted with Parallax because that was the book that the outgoing editor had been most proud of. So, when a query letter arrives at the Doubleday offices addressed to the editor of The Parallax View, it hits Thompson's desk. Thompson agrees to read the unsolicited manuscript and later receives it in the mail. It's a novel called Getting It On by a young writer named Stephen King. Thompson reads it and thinks,
Oh, he's good.
He's especially impressed with young Stephen King's ability to transport the reader to another world, albeit a thrilling and unsettling one. The novel is, after all, about a young man who holds his high school class hostage with a gun.
For me, it's very compelling. And it has the ring of truth in terms of storytelling. It's like you're right there, witnessing the entire thing.
Getting It On would later be published under Stephen's pseudonym Richard Bachman with the new title Rage. However, King ended up yanking it from publication after a California student who held his English class hostage cited the book as part of his inspiration. Indeed, this subject matter was tough even before its eventual publication. Thompson said that although Getting It On proved a tough sell within the house, he worked with King on the manuscript because he saw a lot of promise in both King's writing and his willingness and ability to revise his work. In other words, Thompson saw King as a budding best-selling author.
Because he didn't have a phone, we communicated through letters. But we got to know each other through those letters, too. Ultimately, I turned down Getting It On. And I felt terrible about that because he had made the changes. The story just wouldn't make it through our publishing board, which was quite savage most of the time. I was barely tolerated by them because I had just moved over from sales.
One of those letters they shared was a heartfelt one from Thompson to King, wherein Bill began it by saying,
I'm embarrassed and ashamed to tell you, we will not be publishing Getting It On.
But concluded it with some encouragement that would not only prove to be prophetic, it would also be the foundation of a fruitful working relationship between writer and editor for years to come.
I'm truly sorry, Stephen, that we can't work together on this one. But for what it's worth, you are a writer, and the times and the economy will find out sooner or later. All best, William G. Thompson.
Unfortunately, to the frustration of both, the succulent fruit born of the relationship tree would take just a few more agonizing years to ripen. Over the next couple of years, King would send Thompson multiple novels, all of which Thompson rejected. There was The Running Man, The Long Walk, and Road Work. all of which were eventually published along with Rage as the Bachman books. King had also written Blaze, which would later be another Bachman novel, but after all these failed starts, he didn't even bother to submit that one. But to say Thompson rejected all these novels is a little harsh. I mean, put yourself in his shoes. You're a green editor from the Doubleday sales department, which the publishing board is so you have to be very strategic in which of Stephen's novels you submit first. To quote another articulate white rapper,
"You only get one shot, do not miss your chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime."
Which brings us full circle back to Carrie. As we've established by now, Stephen King is a writing machine. And during all this back and forth with Bill Thompson, he's starting to conjure another monster to keep the lights on at Casa de King. Her name? Bella Swan. Just kidding, it's Carrie White! The origins of ideas are messy things, and we'll get into all of King's Carrie inspirations in part 2, but suffice it to say, despite having a killer hook about an outcast high school girl who, when she has her first period, discovers she has telekinetic powers, well, King's pretty lost as to where to go from there. I mean, as he recounts in his spectacular memoir on writing.
I had 4 problems with what I'd written. First, and least important, was the fact that the story didn't move me emotionally. Second, and slightly more important, was the fact that I didn't much like the lead character. Carrie White seemed thick and passive, a ready-made victim. The other girls were chucking tampons and sanitary napkins at her, chanting, plug it up, and I just didn't care. Third, and more important still, was not feeling at home with either the surroundings or my all-girl cast of supporting characters.
King's fourth problem with Carrie, and to him the most important reason to toss it in the garbage, can't sell it. It's too long for a short story, too short for a novel, the neither fish nor fowl problem.
Nevermore.
And it's telling that in those days, the least of King's problems with Carrie is his lack of an emotional connection with the material or the characters. I mean, shit, he's pleased as punch to press on if there's a chance of selling it. Emotional connection be damned. But I couldn't see wasting 2 weeks, maybe even a month, creating a novella I didn't like and wouldn't be able to sell. So I threw it away. And this is where St. Tabitha saves the day.
She wanted me to go on with it, she said. She wanted to know the rest of the story. I told her I didn't know jack shit about high school girls. She said she'd help me with that part. She had her chin tilted down and was smiling in that severely cute way of hers. You've got something here, she said. I really think you do.
So, Stephen snaps his fingers and conjures a modern-day horror masterpiece from thin air and... No, come on, you guys, writing's hard. But remember, as we learned in our previous episode, if Stephen King is nothing else, he is a relentlessly hard worker, and that doggedness, buttressed by Tabitha's belief in him, allows him to press on with Carrie, even though he's really not feeling it. And to this day, King maintains he learned a very valuable lesson from his Carrie struggles.
Sometimes you have to go on when you don't feel like it. And sometimes you're doing good work when it feels like all you're managing is to shovel shit from a sitting position.
Shovel shit from a sitting position. Shovel shit from a sitting position. That alliteration. That assonance. He truly is the Shakespeare of our time. Yes, sometimes we must go on. And so we shall!
Have you heard of this new Stephen King YouTube series?
I bet they want us to subscribe to the Stephen Kingdom YouTube channel and support their Patreon.
Of course, babe. They can't make this stuff for free.
I don't know, this set is pretty cheap. All they have are weak old powdered donuts and knockoff Slim Jims.
Slam Jams. Oh man, they're the best. They're even better washed down with my Dr. Thunder.
Dr. Thunder? I was in that movie.